Today, we're going to be giving you that technical analysis for the SPY, Qs, Apple, Tesla, Amazon, and NVDA. And overall, what we're going to focus on today is where are we ending at the end of the week? First thing I wanted to talk about was these weekly ranges. So last week's ranges, you'll notice we started to close outside of it. And when you do close outside of it, you can see that dramatic selling come in. Now, we didn't necessarily see some dramatic selling, but something very important from here that I wanted to point out is when we did get this sell signal, when we did get this bar on Wednesday, and we did dip a little bit lower, we can see these retests right around, this would be a 5-day moving average, okay? I change it to a 5-day moving average because I've been studying a lot of different types of signals, and overall, what you want to see when you do get a dramatic drop is some kind of retest of the 5-day moving average before that breaks down further. And right now, you have one that got close to it and one that touched right on it. And yeah, the options market wants this to close in here 68% of the time. So it's very interesting that we come up and we see resistance actually at that 5-day moving average, and we're not able to close above it. We're closing below it. And the last thing about where we ended up at the end of this week is we're closing again below that 20-day moving average. And I think that's a very good sign that we are going to come test at least the bottom Bollinger, if not come and test this 50-day moving average in the near future. Could we get some kind of bounce before then? Sure, we can go into these shorter time frames and look at some divergences that are happening, but we're going to tackle that on Sunday. So subscribe and show me, come back on Sunday so that we can go through some of the shorter time frames and look at those divergences. On Sunday, we'll be giving you those updated ranges for the week ahead, and this is going to be a full week finally. So we're finally going to get our first full week in the year of 2024. So that's very, very good. Now, the important part here is where did we close? Okay, we closed right on this wick here. We're closing right on this area here, which we talked about as some kind of level to bounce. So really, if we did want to bounce from this level, it is still possible at this point, as we do have a bunch of divergences on hourly charts. And then we'd really want to pay attention to if that's able to fade, and then look at what is coming out as far as data goes, which we do get CPI numbers, January 11th. Qs, we have a little similar story, but we did see a little more dramatic selling, right? We could see a little bit more downward trajectory here, and we weren't even able to really get a test of the 20. I mean, we came right up near it, but we didn't fully test it, and we didn't test that 5-day moving average. So we do still have that potential, as we are, as you can notice, moving sideways for 2 days here. Or at least, this day we pushed down and then now we're moving sideways, but we did make a lower low. So that's something to pay attention to. I really think that we do have the potential to bounce from this level. I just want to really pay attention to if that fades and if one thing happens. So this is very different from the SPY, and I need to do more research if this is viable for the Qs. But a lot of people will take this 5-day moving average, and when it does cross below the 20, that is a very, very good signal. And this about 90% of the time when this signal happens, and we actually do see this cross, so that would happen on Monday if we do get some kind of down day, then you are going to test the bottom Bollinger like almost 90% of the time. So we'll have to look at this on Monday. Right now they're kind of touching, but we have to see on Monday if that just bounces right back up. So we have to pay attention to this. We're moving sideways. Maybe this is some consolidation sideways, and maybe we do break down early on in the week. That's going to be where we want to pay attention to those weekly ranges. But at this point, because the SPY's at a level where it could bounce, and we do have divergences down here we're going to go over on Sunday, you could get some kind of bounce, but is that going to fade back down below this 5-day moving average, getting these to cross? Something we didn't really tackle on the SPY is the Qs actually did break out of their wedge, right? Both of them have broken out of their wedges. So let's just do a simple measurement for the Qs. And you can see that if we did this full measurement, we would head to much lower levels. Now, this is not how I personally do my profit taking or anything like that. I'm not holding shorts till the Qs are at 365. I like to look for points of liquidity where I can find an easy out. And where is that easy out? Well, we've talked about it before, right? We've talked about it right in here. There's some liquidity. This looks like an area where we could bounce from. We would be coming outside of the Bollinger Bands, and we would be testing that 50-day moving average. So really, if we did see price action get down to this point, I would start flipping from the short side. I really would start to look more into maybe a 2-hour divergence or a triple divergence on a 1-hour chart, things like that, because around these little sources of liquidity, and especially around some kind of news like CPI data, we can really see a solid bounce. And then we'll have to talk about, if we're seeing that is a lower high, or if we're actually going to see a little bit higher bounce to get the Qs or to get the SPY to an all-time high. So if we come down into this area, let's just say it's by Wednesday, and then we see some kind of big bounce, and then we start to fade that, like giving us some kind of right shoulder over here, and maybe this is like a left, and this is just a big right shoulder. What we would pay attention to is the SPY. If the SPY is actually making a move like this, creating that all-time high, while the Qs are actually creating a lower high at lower levels, we've paid attention to that signal before, and usually it means that stocks are going to head to lower levels. Now, that's just something that could happen. So we have to be, open to this daily MACD curling up, right? It is in positive territory. If we do get some kind of positive news and then we see that curl back up, it's a good chance that we're going to test a higher level somewhere up in here. So you know that I'm slightly leaning towards us getting some kind of another bullish push into March, but I am willing to flip if I see signals tell me something different. I'm gonna pull up IWM today just because on the daily chart, we're closing below the 5, we're closing below the 20. So the red lines are all 5-day moving averages at this point because you can really use them on daily charts. We already noticed that on the 9-day, we got our pretty much our bar underneath the 9-day that told us, hey, there's some weakness here. But the important thing here is not only is IWM closing below the 20 again, we are actually closing outside of this zone. So if we're not able to buy back into this zone, or we see this zone as resistance and fade back down, we are most likely going to this area right here. Okay, we're going to go to the 200, we're going to go to the 50. So we just have to pay attention to that, and this is a big sign that there is still weakness in this market. Even if there is some kind of bounce, we would look for that to fade and close below this zone again. Because when we do break out of this zone, we like to retest it, and that's when we see another drop. Now, Apple has been very good to us, right? We pointed out this divergence. This was a very, I would say, good trade, right? We get those divergences at the same time. So Apple was really telling us, hey, there is something bad coming. And guess what? They gap lower. We get the sell signal. And so what we pointed out last week or before last week was if we're not able to hold up in this zone, this is where that weekly moving or that weekly range is sitting, the lower side of it. So we can see dramatic selling. And look what happens. We get dramatic selling. Okay, so we get dramatic selling. We're at the 200 at this point. We could bounce from there. You guys know, though, I really like this zone down here. I would like some kind of push a little bit lower, maybe test the bottom of this big wedge or triangle that we're in at this point. And then maybe we get some bullishness, possibly with CPI, because a lot of people are stating the CPI could actually be bad news for the market, but I'm not necessarily seeing that in the data. So something very surprising would have to happen, which we did get surprised a little bit on Friday with that data. So it's just something to pay attention to. We don't know what that data report is actually going to be. So let's just be patient and react based on the number that we see and the price action that's going on before and after it. Amazon's right where we were talking about, right? Amazon's right in this liquidity zone that we were talking about because it's a very strong point and it's closing right at that weekly expected move. So if you did catch this on Amazon, it does have that divergence on the MACD. It didn't have it on the RSI at the same time. So that's why I'm leaning towards this being some kind of pullback on Amazon. Now, this could still get more liquidity, right? If they need more liquidity to head higher, we can come down a little bit further, right? We do still have this bundle in here that could be important, but you can see as of this bar right here, Thursday, we noticed that this crossing did happen, okay? So that's where I need to do a little bit more research and see if, this works for individual stocks. I know that it works for the SPY. So if you want to use this for the SPY, it's a very good tool. A lot of the time we do like to retest the 5-day, which the 5-day is catching up at this point, and then we go and test the bottom Bollinger. Okay, so we haven't necessarily tested the actual bottom Bollinger at this point. We've come just towards it, and maybe we are slightly moving sideways for a couple of days to build some liquidity in this area to move a little bit lower. Tesla was one we were mentioning. You did have that slight divergence on the RSI up here, right? We see that slight divergence here, but you don't necessarily have that on the MACD at the same time. So that's why I was overall saying this most likely will be a pullback somewhere around that 230 to 232 range. Really like this area, right? We've tried to close below it. We used it as support to go higher. We actually gapped above it. You guys know when I say we gap above an area and then we kind of just go past it and then we retest it and go again. I really like that signal. So the fact that we're getting a test here, a test here, a test here, we're seeing that area as important. And what lies right around that area? The 200. So this is something that you'll want to pay attention to if we do break below this level, right? Come into this gap, maybe even fill this gap and then see that buy back up. That's something I'm going to be paying attention to throughout the week on Tesla. Now, the bad thing here is you did have a little bit of wedging in here. I don't think this full measured move will play out. I'm really liking this 230 to 232 zone. But the fact that you're getting a sell signal, you're right next to that negative territory. I'm really going to see if this MACD gets into negative territory. We could be seeing a further drop down into the bottom of this big triangle that Tesla has been in for quite some time. So we could see us test, somewhere around this like 218 level this week. And that's where I'm going to pay attention to my weekly ranges. Speaking of weekly ranges, Tesla actually did close within its weekly range. Okay, so Tesla actually did close within it, which is very, very good. 68% of the time we do close within that little range I give you on Sundays for the SPY and the Qs. So that's something to pay attention to because Apple was getting that dramatic breakdown from that weekly range, but Tesla was holding up a little bit better. So maybe Tesla does just have a little bit more downside before we can kind of base out and then start to get some kind of retest or maybe even another bullish push out of this. Now, one thing I wanted to mention on Tesla was the fact that you're getting this red bar on the histogram for the weekly. So this is actually very bad news, and this might be a signal to pay attention to if we get some dramatic selling next week, if the CPI actually comes in as bad for the market. We would really want to actually look at Tesla because this is early on signaling, hey, this is a red bar on the histogram. You got that weekly cross. It's right by negative territory. So this is what you want to pay attention to because if we break out of this big triangle we've been in for quite some time, you could come test some new lows, right? We could test this low. We could test in here around that 154.78. So that is something to pay attention to. Tesla does move dramatically, and right now it has crossed on that weekly MACD right by negative territory. So I'd really, really pay attention to Tesla this week. NVIDIA, we were talking about how it was kind of flagging, right? It looked like it was slightly flagging, and now that flag is starting to spread out. So you're going to see some bigger swings maybe this week. We could, on this chart here, right, we could see NVIDIA swing all the way down, come to the bottom Bollinger, swing all the way up. And the important part here is look at the Bollinger Bands. They're getting tight, so some kind of explosive move is going to happen, most likely in the next 1 to 3 weeks. And we do get CPI this week. So if I'm looking for that big move, I notice the Bollinger Bands are getting tight. I'm going to look 3 weeks into the future and see, hey, what big news is coming out and what big dates can I mark on my calendar so that I can pay attention to those dates. Now, the easy part here is if we do see that bullishness this week, you're going to get this MACD cross, right? We're going to see this MACD cross in positive territory, and maybe that is another push higher to set up another point of reference, maybe getting a divergence here, but also a divergence kind of across more like this. So we want to pay attention to this at this point. I do think there is potential here for some drops, and we'll go into the shorter time frame to see if NVIDIA actually can test this bottom Bollinger. And with these yields, you can tell in the media, you can tell from what people are saying, yes, we're kind of fading below that 200 at this point. But what were we talking about for the last couple of weeks? If we come down into this area, it's a little bit to be alarmed because that means we're pricing in way too many rate cuts. And what have you heard on the news a bunch? Oh, we priced in way too many rate cuts. Okay, so now we're starting to see that buyback up, at least with the 10-year yield, and we're seeing TLT drop because they have to price in the fact that there's not going to be as many rate cuts. So if that narrative continues, we could see this continued strength up to that point of about 4.362. And this is where it's important to look at both sides, right? The 10-year, it's right in line with the TLT, okay? They're just opposite of each other. So what do we want to pay attention to on TLT? Well, you're getting a sell signal. Sure, it's like a reverse hammer candle, which is a slight reversal candle, okay? So you could see some kind of bounce from it. This is a pretty weak reversal candle, okay? So we want to pay attention to the fact that, we do have this slight reversal candle, but the more important thing we want to pay attention to is we're closing below all these moving averages as of Friday. So that is really what I'm thinking of as the most important thing to pay attention to on TLT. You're closing below the 200. When you close below the 200, you start to see that bearishness. We can kind of see, let's just look back, maybe around this area where we were trying to fight above it. You see, if we just keep closing below it, it's a really hard struggle to get above it, right? So we close below it again, we get this retest, we close below it again, we see some of that selling come in. It just tells me, hey, we could go to lower levels on this. Where could it go? Well, let's look right in here. Right in here looks like an important point. We have liquidity on our left right over here, lines up with all this bundle of price action. So I really want to pay attention to those weekly ranges for TLT this week. And I believe that's going to sit somewhere around $94. The VIX, we're going to go into the shorter time frames on the VIX for Sunday. So come back for the VIX because it is going to be pretty dang important. But at this point, it looks like to me we are in some kind of range, and that's going to be easier to see on like an hourly chart. So we'll show you that. Now, if this does want to get some kind of bounce early on in the week, hey, look for this range to hold up. Maybe create this range for yourself at this point. It's a little bit slanted, but it is a range. And we could test the bottom of that one more time, not get this MACD to curl over into negative territory. Maybe we even come outside of it, test that 1212 area that we really like. If we actually got a test of that 1212 and then we saw this start to go up, that might be a very bearish signal for 2024 because we would maybe cross over this weekly. So as of right now, we're seeing on the weekly chart here, we're seeing this kind of like fade, right? Testing the 20 on the weekly and then fade. Kind of like we did over here. And what happened over here? Well, we got some kind of tiny bounce in the price action there. So I want to pay attention to this. But if we do get a very positive week, I'd say for 2 more weeks, even this week, if it gets really positive and doesn't necessarily fade, we can see this cross. And when this crosses, you have to be weary for the next 6 months. You have to be open to the potential for a crash. You have to be open to the potential for some kind of bear market to begin. Join back on Sunday because we are going to be going over those shorter time frames. We're seeing a lot of divergences, but what do we always say on this channel? Maybe it's the main takeaway for going into next week. When you have those divergences on the shorter time frames, you do still need some kind of news, some kind of narrative to really get people to buy into those divergences. So all it means is the momentum to the downside is slowing, but we need some kind of good news to bring those charts back into positive territory. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great weekend. It is snowing here, and I'm not the biggest fan of snow, but that's okay. I'll stay warm. I got some errands to run. Hope you have a good weekend. Have a good night. See you Sunday. Peace.